To ask positive questions, known as appreciative inquiry, is to look for the divine and the holy in your workplace. The more you do this, the more you bless that work and that you wish to transform. And the more you feel yourself transform, the more you will feel blessed.
What have you seen leaders do? What are some of the practices?
They might have different language for it, but if they want to go in this direction that you and I are talking about.
Welcome to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast, hosted by Andrew Cohn. Andrew is a trusted counselor, coach, and consultant who works with leaders and teams to increase productivity and fulfillment in the workplace. If you'd like to connect with Andrew about individual or team coaching, leadership workshops, or team alignment, please go to www.lighthouseteams.com. Enjoy the podcast.
In this episode of the podcast, I speak with Judi Neal. And it took me a little bit of time to get Judi on the podcast, but I'm so glad that we were able to connect. We've known each other for a bit, and we've reconnected for purposes of this podcast. But a number of earlier guests spoke to me about Judi as a pioneer and the work that she's done at the Tyson Center for Faith and Spirituality at the University of Arkansas. Judi talks about her work as a consultant with Edgewalkers International. She talks about her personal story of being a whistleblower in a major global corporation and how that led her on essentially, my term, not hers, crisis of faith, reconnected with her spirituality. And since that time, how that has impacted the work that she does. And making a commitment to bring her spirituality to work. So she explores the qualities of people that bring these dimensions to their work. As she says, always looking for that integration. She talks about the impact of trust. She talks about the impact of even very simple tasks. Like the most common thing that you can do to bring a dimension of spirituality to the workplace is to take a moment of silence at the beginning of meetings. And she talks a bit about how to do that in a way that's inviting, without telling, without lecturing, without imposing in any way. And she begins the episode with a reading from her new book called Inspiring Workplace Spirituality. And near the end, she spends a lot of time talking about the practices identified in her research, where she's always looking for ways for people to bring this type of connection between their personal spirituality and their behavior in the workplace, creating healthier, more ethical cultures. So enjoy. Welcome back to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I am here with my new friend and one of the real pioneers in the space of spirituality and leadership and business, Judi Neal, in the great state of Arkansas. And Judi is known for her work with Edgewalkers and perhaps most notably with the Tyson Center for Faith and Spirituality. And we'll talk about all of that, Judi. But first, let me say welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here, and it's great to get to know you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, you know, breaking from tradition, which is always a good thing. So thank you for being an Edgewalker and doing that for this podcast. Maybe we should start a different way. And maybe we could start with your reading something from your Inspiring Workplace Spirituality book. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd love to do that. Yeah, what I'd like to share is the first chapter in the book, which is called Blessings at Work. And it's actually one of the first essays I ever wrote. And I've been writing essays for 25 years. And so this book is really a collection of different essays on workplace spirituality over my career. And so here's the book for those who can see the video. And let me get to the page.
For those of you only listening, there was a book in the camera that's called Inspiring Workplace Spirituality.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll try to be visual and
Yes.
audiological at the same time. All right, this little essay is called Blessings at Work. Andrew Harvey, actually, before we start, as we're doing this, to say that in many places that practice workplace spirituality, they begin with a moment of silence or a prayer or a song or contemplation. And so you and I, Andrew, decided that it would be fun to model that a little bit by creating contemplative place together, a space together as we start this meeting. So for those of you listening or watching, we invite you to really center, however that is for you, and to ground yourself and just be in the present moment with however these words might have meaning for you.
And if you're driving, please be very careful.
Don't close your eyes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Blessings at work. Andrew Harvey, author of The Hidden Journey, had a mystical experience in the early stages of his spiritual journey. He felt his body fill with soft light, and then he began to hear a voice. He knew it to be the voice of Mother Mira, his teacher. She said, "You cannot transform what you have not blessed. You can never transform what first you have not accepted and blessed." How many of us are trying to transform our lives, our work, and our organizations without first blessing them? What does it mean to bless something or someone? One definition of blessing is to make holy. In your work, do you see yourself as holy, as connected to the divine? Do you see God in others? Do you see some kind of higher purpose or transcendent energy working through the organization? One of my spiritual practices is to try to see in everyone, including in myself, as a child of God. In my better moments, I can see that each person is on his or her own journey of faith and that they are doing the best they can. To bless someone, we must first suspend our negative thinking about them. This is not to condone unethical or inappropriate behavior. It is simply to avoid labeling and name calling, even if only in our minds. The workplace can offer real challenges and opportunities to practice this kind of non-judgment. Judge not lest you be judged. This is from Matthew 7, chapter 1. When someone does something that upsets or frustrates you, the knee-jerk response is often to judge and label that person. But what if we could take a breath and remember that this person is also a child of God? I try to remember to say to myself, just like me, this person has known suffering. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. When people in the Hindu tradition greet each other, they say, Namaste. The literal meaning is, I bow to you, and is frequently interpreted as, I honor the divine within you. This is a form of blessing, of recognizing the holiness of the other. Often in the workplace, as in other parts of our lives, we wish we could change the people who appear to be preventing us from meeting our goals. If we are in a leadership role, we are expected to bring about change and transformation in individuals and in the organization's sphere of influence. The first transformation must begin within ourselves. This inner transformation requires moving from a mindset of judgment to a mindset of blessing. As an experiment, think of one person in your workplace who's mildly annoying. Don't begin this experiment with someone in your mind who makes you really angry. Start with someone easy. See them as a child of God. Picture them as a baby, as having a divine spark within. Have compassion for whatever may be going on in his or her life that might make this person act in a way that annoys or upsets you. Then bless them. Perhaps you can say a prayer or simply wish that person well. See what happens. That individual may or may not change, but if you change your mindset, your feelings about that person may get gentler, and that could have some surprising effects on your relationship. Not only can we bless individuals in our workplace, we can bless the organization itself. The mood in many organizations is pretty dismal. This negativity can be contagious, and the lack of engagement can have a negative impact on customer satisfaction, employee turnover, and other factors that can affect the bottom line. Notice what happens the next time you hear a coworker complain about something in the workplace. Others readily jump on the bandwagon and add their complaints, and there's a real drain of energy as people commiserate with one another. And then notice what happens if you ask a group of people to tell stories about a moment when they felt proud of working for the organization. You can get a real shift in the energy in the very positive way. Look for what is good in your organization or what makes you feel proud to work there. Those are ways to bless the organization. To ask positive questions, known as appreciative inquiry, is to look for the divine and the holy in your workplace. The more you do this, the more you bless that work and that you wish to transform. And the more you feel yourself transform, the more you will feel blessed.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, really sets a lovely tone.
As we bless each other and all those listening.
As we bless each other. And actually, let me ask you this. How would you respond to someone who said, I don't know, I'm not a religious person. Blessing feels religious to me, but I like the idea of it. I mean, it's not a bad thing. I can't argue, right? I can't say that, the world is a worse place if there are more blessings. But the whole religion thing, I can't get behind. What's your simplest definition of what a blessing is? A blessing that we could offer to each other or to a workplace or to something?
Yeah, and I think that's a bigger question of the issues around the language of spirituality and faith and the word blessing itself. Just to back up for a minute, the first time I really thought about blessing someone else or something, I was pretty young, and I think I actually felt scared that lightning might come down and strike me, because who am I to bless someone? Isn't that just what priests or ministers do? I have no right. It felt like such a religious thing that it was very uncomfortable. And yet, like you say, there's something that in me went like, well, I do kind of like the idea of wishing someone else well, which is, I think, my simplest definition of blessing is wishing someone else well. It's there's a Buddhist prayer that says something like, may all beings be happy. To me, that's a blessing. We just want others to be happy and to be well, and ourselves included in that. It's like a better world.
And what would our workplaces be like if there were, if some small percentage of people were clandestinely thinking this as they walked through the halls?
Well, I would like to tell you that that's probably happening. And it may not be a small percentage. There's the cultural creative study by Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson that looked at values in the United States, and then later they looked at Europe as well. They found that 25% of the population deeply valued spirituality, personal growth, living in alignment with one's highest values. So it's spirituality and related concepts are really a big part of people's value systems. And they considered that the fastest growing group of values. There were other groups of values around materialism or around stability, but the fastest growing group of values was around spirituality and ecology and psychological growth and well-being and those kinds of things. So, there's a good likelihood that there's some group of people going around and silently wishing others well. And that could give us hope in the workplace, because we also know there's groups of people going around wanting to climb on each other and reach the pinnacle by destroying as many as they can to get there. But they're smaller minority.
Right. Noted. I would love to ask you about I will ask you about your story and how you came to work in this space. But first, for those who don't know you, it was interesting. I was led to you by 4 or 5 previous guests on this podcast who said, "Are you talking to Judi Neal? You should talk to Judi Neal." And so here we are, and thank you for this. And um, could you just talk a little bit about what your work is, and perhaps you could weave your story into that? But we mentioned the new book, Inspiring Workplace Spirituality. I mentioned the Tyson Center for Faith and Spirituality at University of Arkansas. But Edgewalkers has been your group for, I think, 20 years or so, in the community that you've built. But please say more about your work and what you do, and then you go from there.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I guess we'll start with the story and then I'll try to weave some biographical sort of resume kinds of things in there. The story that's gotten me onto the work that I do today happened when I was working for Honeywell and human resources. And I had finished my dissertation at Yale on building middle management change to organizational, middle management commitment to organizational change. I had done that research to understand the change dynamics. And so I was very interested in human resources and organizational development, in what are the cutting edge things happening in organizations. And so I was attracted to work at this particular Honeywell plant in Illinois, where they were doing what's called socio-technical systems, which meant statistical process control and total quality management, but also group dynamics and all this leadership development, team group training. And so I was in charge of really the cultural development for the organization, of people getting more involved in their work and building this whole interlocking team structure. And so that was the work I had studied, and that was the work I really loved doing. And while I was working at Honeywell, I was asked to work with a team in ballistics. This was an ammunition plant. And I was asked to work with a team in ballistics because their morale was low. And it seemed kind of strange because they had the most freedom of any team. They were very self-managing, and they had the highest pay because their work required a lot more knowledge and skills than many of the other manufacturing teams. The ballistics team was the one that did the testing of the ammunition that we built. And so it didn't make logical sense that the morale was poor. So
you would think that freedom and high pay would tip the scale towards higher levels of morale and engagement. One would think, all other things being equal, of course.
Right. Greater job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the job satisfaction literature, those kinds of autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
interesting work and meaningful work, all of that, they had all the factors, but they were all wanting to transfer out of that department and go to places where lesser pay and harder work. So it was illogical. And so I was asked to go look at it and actually, it's like build their morale. Send that woman from HR out to the team and improve their morale. I don't know whether I was supposed to blow up balloons and do dances or what they expected, but
Right.
I did the normal thing of interviewing everybody and collecting data, and very quickly found out the reason the morale was poor is because they were being told to alter ballistics data and report to the government that this ammunition was effective when it wasn't. And we were servicemen's lives in danger. They couldn't live with that. They had such strong integrity. One of the young men who worked in that team said, "I stopped going to church. I have nightmares." I mean, it was just disrupting everything for them. They were really suffering and they were looking for a way out. And so I asked their permission to blow the whistle, essentially, and report this and get a stop put to it. And that happened. And very quickly, well, first of all, the plant, all the work was stopped in the plant, and investigators came in, and various people were interviewed, and some people were removed from their positions. And so there was a lot of turmoil. And my boss called me aside and basically told me, you weren't supposed to find this out. And I went, oh my God,
I'm sorry. So your boss, he or she knew about it?
he knew about it when he sent me
Wow.
out there. He
Oh
just
boy.
thought I would do the woman from HR dance and make them happy somehow. But he knew, and he was condoning it. And so then I began to find out from other people that this was part of a plot at the top management in the plant to up their bonuses, because they didn't care if it was like, how much ammunition did you send out? It didn't matter to them if it was quality. They're going, oh, it's probably just used in target practice. It just doesn't matter. So the more we ship, the more we'll get bonuses. That's all they cared about. And they didn't care about the consequences. We're talking 35 and 40 millimeter ammunition in machine guns on airplanes, that if one of them doesn't fulfill its requirements, it could blow up in the gun, which blows up the gunner and the whole plane. And I mean, there's high consequences for not doing the best quality. And they just didn't seem to care. And so I was horrified. And it was a wake-up call for me, because I found out lots of people knew about this and nobody was doing anything. And so I found myself asking, like, why me, God? And my spiritual life up to that point had been very inner, private. I didn't belong to a church or religion. I had belonged to something earlier in terms of a Protestant religion, but I wasn't a religious person. But I was drawn to spirituality for the inner calm that it would give me, but it was not a part of my outer life in any kind of way. And in the middle of this wake-up call for what felt like evil going on in the organization, and why was I the one that seemed to be put in this position, this peace came over me. And it's just like, there wasn't really a voice or anything, but it was just this sense, this inner sense of, there's a reason, just trust it. And that you'll understand, kind of, you'll know, there's a hymn that goes, you'll know more about it by and by, which really means more about heaven. But for me, it was like, well, I came to understand that I would be shown whatever was next. And the message for me at that point was, this spirituality stuff is not just a hobby. The things that I read and study for inner peace has daily application. It has deep meaning. It is a way of life. And that I'm part of something bigger that I didn't understand. All of us are. And that I came to see that in that situation, there was some reason that I was the one that, things lined up for me to be the whistleblower and not someone else. Part of it is I was an outsider to that community. And I think that that's a logical reason. But I just felt like there was a spiritual reason too. And I made a commitment in that waking up time to, well, I called it trust the universe. That was my phrase. It's like, okay, there's something bigger going on here. And I will just surrender and trust that I'll be guided and shown. And that was 1973. That was a long time ago. And that's still that's my strategic plan for my life, is trust and be guided. And I have not made other plans. I have kind of ideas and visions, but it is a way of life for me now. And I found, even in the midst of my life being threatened after that, having to disappear for a while, all the drama that went on as a result of me becoming a whistleblower, because I called Honeywell corporate to report what was going on, and all hell broke loose. That was probably not the best place to report this. And so anyway, I suffered consequences, and I started really practicing the things I was reading spiritually. And some of that is like really looking for the good in a situation or in people, like I read about in that blessing. What's the blessing in this crisis? What's the blessing in the messages I'm getting from leaders that I'm a bad person because I created this chaos? And how to make sense of all that. And the more I really surrendered to that, the better my life got, even in the midst of this craziness. And I realized, or at least felt, that this was too good to not share with other people, this way of thinking and being, which I think, Andrew, you may have stumbled upon in your own life. And I don't know if you've ever shared, if you have a transformation story and a wake up call, but that, I'd love to hear if you're resonating with any of what I'm saying, and if something like that has happened for you.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I know for me, I don't know that there was ever any moment, spiritual epiphany sort of thing. I can tell you that for me, there have been times when I have felt very connected to other people, particularly other people that I didn't know very well. In other words, alarmingly connected or shockingly connected. And for me, I would hearken that to a bit of a spiritual awakening, to the extent that for me, spiritual, I don't often define the term, but it's being connected to something greater than myself would be a simple definition. And that greater than myself could be something divine up there away from me, like some people might believe. I don't personally believe that. Or it could be connected to something greater that is all around me and that I have in common with these lovely people around me, who perhaps 15 minutes ago I didn't experience as so lovely, but something happens. It can be a little bit for me when I have experiences like that. If we were to categorize, it's a little bit like some of the definitions of the word awe I've seen recently, and the wonder of awe and the impact of awe is that for me that can feel quote unquote spiritual. I would use that term because it's just more than I can explain. It's not simply an emotional experience, et cetera. It's something bigger than that. There's something bigger than me. That's the way I might answer that. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. That very much fits with my experience and my definition. So I did feel a part of something bigger, and that there was meaning behind this. And so I ended up quitting, and because there was no future for me at Honeywell. There were a number.
But you, excuse me, you had the opportunity to stay. It's not like you were forced out or fired or blackballed or I don't know.
Well, what they did was take away all my job duties and forbid me to leave my office because they didn't want me causing more problems.
Right, but we're not firing you.
No, they knew better than to fire me.
Right.
Because then I would sue. Well, I did sue.
Okay, so you quit.
I quit, yeah, and it was years later that I sued them, and I won for harassment of a whistleblower. And so I left not knowing what I was supposed to do next, and spent a lot of time in contemplation and prayer and depression, actually, because I had these big dreams. They had considered me fast track, highly promotable, big plans for my career, and then all of a sudden all the doors were closed. And it was over. And so I could see that there was nothing ever going to happen for me at Honeywell. And so I ended up realizing that what was best for me to do after this experience was go back into academia. By that time, I had my PhD from Yale. I had taught classes before. Now I've had corporate experience at a couple of different Honeywell facilities, as well as a family-owned business somewhere in between all that, doing human resources, organizational change work. And I thought, well, I have now seen the best and the worst of organizations. And I remember when I first started teaching with no organizational experience, as a grad student, and people would say, the best teachers are the ones who've actually been there with their feet on the ground And I could see why, because I didn't know what I was talking about. Well, after all these experiences, I thought I had something to share. And I also felt a real sense of calling to help our future leaders understand something deeper about the meaning of work and their obligation to society, and not to, to move from this consciousness of selfishness and ego and control to a consciousness of connectedness and compassion and caring for others, and having high integrity. And so I ended up getting a job at the University of New Haven teaching management. I was the only woman professor in a group of 48 other business professors.
Wow. Mm.
And so I learned a little bit about tokenism. Oh, we need a woman on this committee. We don't have any women. You must go be on this committee. And, that kind of stuff. So I got stretched pretty thin until I learned to say no. And by the time I went to the university, I had made that commitment to make spirituality central to everything I do. So that meant my teaching, and it also meant my research. And so my teaching was really about, like I would say, a little prayer before I went into the classroom, and to ask for guidance about how I can make a difference to this group of students in this next hour. And miraculous things would happen in class. It was always wonderful, and a lot of personal transformation and healing for the students that really made a difference and had meaning for me. And I decided that I wanted to do research on this phenomenon of integrating work and spirituality that I was doing on a personal level, and to see, is there anybody else doing this, or am I the only crazy person that thinks this might actually be a practical thing to do? And it was not hard to find many, many other people. So I began interviewing people about their spiritual. I would ask them to tell me, what's your spiritual history? Tell me about major faith or religious or spiritual turning points or moments in your life from early age to now. And then I would ask them to tell me about their career story. And again, what were the major turning points? And where was there any intersection between career changes and spiritual changes? And there were a lot. And it was very clear that when someone makes a decision to centralize spirituality in their lives, that it has a real positive impact on their career. It's not always easy, but it has a very, very positive impact on their leadership, on their way of being with others, and on the impact they have. So that led to me writing the book you mentioned, Edgewalkers, which was the first book I had published. And because I called these people Edgewalkers because they build the bridge between the material world and the spiritual world. Nowadays we talk about quantum science and the physical world and the quantum world and the world of energy. There's different languages people use and different kind of doorways they use to talk about this experience. So some of it's religious. For some people, it's being, there's CEOs I interviewed who were Catholic and who went to Mass. One of them also did transcendental meditation every day. So he would go to Mass and then he would do TM. What a lovely man he was. He was the head of AT&T Canada, and he transformed that business basically through being loving. And his practices, I think, really helped him do that. And then there's people who didn't have any particular religious path, but for whom a more secular spirituality guided them. And so I began to look for what are the common themes in their stories, and what are the qualities that they carry that are common in most of these stories. And so qualities would be more like, what is their essence? What is their way of being that's common? Things like, some examples are self-awareness. They've all had self-awareness practices of some kind. And other qualities might be high integrity, really aware of their values, really committed to living those values. They're very passionate people. They're also very playful. And that was one of the most interesting qualities that surprised
Mm.
me, was this sense of spontaneity and creativity and playfulness. So I write about that in the book. And then I ask them, what do they actually do, particularly when I have tough business decisions to make, or there's a big opportunity and they want to integrate their spirituality in their decision making about building a new business or merging with some, whatever that business issue might be. And so I document some of the activities of the skills that they use that had both a spiritual component and a practical everyday business component to it. So really always looking for that integration.
Mm.
So I've
Beautiful.
just
And
talked
when
a lot. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and when you share this information, when you share the findings of this and the overlap and the intersection and the impact, how is that generally received? Is it received warmly? Is it received, oh yeah, we get it? Or is it, oh, I don't know, I'm still skeptical because it's religion. Why are we talking about religion in the workplace? I'm curious to know what your experience has been sharing that information, sharing the research that you've done. Here are the results of the research. How does that land? How is it received?
Well, one of the first things I do, because I know that some people have negative reactions to religion or the word spirituality or the word faith. Those are kind of the three trigger words that for some people are pretty uncomfortable. And so I actually, on a blackboard or whiteboard, I'll put up the word religion on one side, and in the middle I'll put spirituality, and then the other side I'll put faith, and then I'll say, tell me what religion means to you. And we'll brainstorm a bunch of things about religion. And I'll say, okay, tell me what spirituality means to you. We'll brainstorm that. We'll do the same for faith. And then we'll look at, geez, there's an awful lot of commonalities across here. And the words are actually kind of fuzzy the way people define them. But at the final question I'll ask them is there any benefit of these things in the workplace? So words that commonly show up will be compassion, forgiveness, kindness, listening, fellowship. And I'll say, are these things harmful to the workplace or are they good for the workplace?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, those are actually pretty good. The big deal is people don't want proselytizing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main resistance. They don't want someone else forcing their religion on them. They want freedom of choice to practice a faith or a spiritual path or not. They just want freedom. And so if the organization, and by law, you must do that in an organization. So it's just helping people to know what's right and what's wrong and to value people having their unique paths. So I've found that once you allow them to engage in a conversation of what do these things mean and whether or not they might be valuable, the resistance goes away and they begin to see that it's not so scary. And one of the reasons I developed this term, Edgewalkers, was I wanted a term that wasn't religious or spiritual. It's this walking between different worldviews and building a bridge and integrating them. And you can do that in diversity. You can do that in functions. Like I have an example in the book of one of my doctoral students who worked for a utility, and she was an IT person, so good at those kinds of systems, and her heart was in human resources. So she was getting her degree in human resources. And when she graduated, she moved into human resources, but she could speak the IT systems language to the IT people and the human resource language to the human resource people. And she would build bridges between them, which would lead to better systems that had the human element taken into it, as well as really understanding the best of technology. And so there's a mindset, a way of being where people can have a foot in both worlds and build bridges. And those are the people who move our organizations forward. So why not support them?
Right. And then the example you're sharing with this person with the technical experience and the people experience, this need not be something that sounds a little that doesn't need to sound like other realms. And it's very practical. It's the people from this part of the office and people in this part of the office, and a greater bridge could mean greater results, greater quality of conversation, et cetera. Very practically speaking.
Very practically, yeah. And you've got the cross-cultural bridge building. So in these days in our organizations, people work from all over the world, and so to be able to make them feel comfortable and feel welcome brings out the best in them. And we can, like I'm building a course right now on leadership and songwriting with a woman from China. And she's building in Taoism, which is a philosophy, not a religion, and teaching me about that as like I want to structure things. I come from the business school, and first you do number one, then you do number two. You're very linear. And she's like, we don't need to be linear, Judi. We can let things emerge. And so she's teaching me from her culture another way of being and I'm teaching her a little bit more about how to be organized. And so out of that comes something better that neither of us would have created alone. So, there's just many, many ways to build bridges. But I do firmly believe that a deeper commitment to spiritual practice and a spiritual way of life makes that much easier and makes us more effective, because we're not just doing it in our heads. We're doing it mind, body, spirit. We're doing it in our hearts. We're doing it holistically. And so it's more authentic. People feel it. They trust us. And I really believe that trust is the glue that holds an organization together. It holds a relationship together. It holds a family together. And so we can be authentic and trusting and build trust, that will be much more effective. And spiritual practices help us get there. They're not the only way, but they are a way.
Right. No, and I appreciate your saying that, because I often find that a level of receptivity, doors of receptivity are opened for us human beings when there is acknowledgement that whatever I'm advocating for isn't the only way.
Yeah.
That suddenly there's just permission, it's like permission to speak freely, sir, permission to open my mind, that I don't feel like I'm being shoehorned into something or essentially proselytized,
Right.
to use your word.
Yeah.
You don't have an agenda to convert me to something, but rather to perhaps invite me into something and invite me with my own story. Just as you asked me my own story earlier in this conversation.
Right. Yeah. How can we support each other on our unique paths, whatever they are? How can we help each other be the best human beings we can be? That's going to help us individually and help us in our organizations. And to me, that's spirituality and leadership, bringing out the best in each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you say that. In earlier conversations on this podcast, people have talked about bringing help. What is it that brings people to life? What is it that evokes purpose? What is that the deepest meaning for people? And here you are tapping this another, with this language. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I guess there's another Zen saying, I think it is. It's like we're all fingers pointing at the moon. And so our words, our language, they're just different words to try to explain an ineffable, unexplainable experience that has meaning and that we want to share with others, that they have their own version of it, not that they have our experience or belief what we believe, but that they can have their own highest experience to bring out the best in them.
So what have you seen leaders do in your work, because you're an organizational change agent, in addition to being an author and many other things? What have you seen leaders do effectively to make this happen, to help other people open up these doors to what has the most meaning for them, for example? What have you seen leaders do? What are some of the practices? And I always steer conversations this way because I'm a coach and team practitioner. What works?
The simplest thing, and people often ask me, like, what would be the first non-threatening, low-risk thing I could do if I want to implement something like workplace spirituality. And again, they might have different language for it, but if they want to go in this direction that you and I are talking about. And the thing I've seen the most commonly is a moment of silence before meetings. That's just this invitation to come together, settle in. Sometimes people will have somebody who guides a meditation, inviting people to center, inviting them to slow down, let go of whatever was happening before this meeting, come and be present. On a neurological basis, that just helps us be smarter. Because if our brains are all jangled thinking about all these crazy things that we were dealing with and stressful, and the amygdala is screaming, help, help, we can't think straight. But you calm down and you come to a meeting, and then you could focus on whatever that issue is and bring your best. So a moment of silence doesn't feel religious or spiritual. It could, if someone's prone to defining and feeling something as spiritual. Somebody who's religious might use that moment as a moment of prayer and say, dear God, please help me be my best in this meeting. But that would be a silent inner thing they say. I wouldn't advise someone in a non-religious organization to tell everybody, okay, now we're going to ask God to help us be our best. That would actually be against the law. And so don't do that. But if somebody wants to on their own, the moment of silence invites them to bring their religious self, or if someone who follows a more secular spiritual path and thinks of things as energy, maybe they use that as a moment to settle down their energy and center their energy. And for someone who isn't inclined at all, it's just a moment to de-stress, just to, center and get in touch with their breath. We know that that's a physical thing that helps people be present. So that's the simplest thing that I've seen people do, leaders do. Another thing that I often get called in for is what one CEO friend of mine called advances. He said, we're not doing retreats. We're not retreating. We're going to advance. And what he would do before his quarterly advances with his leaders is he would give them things to, like podcasts or essays or chapters out of books. He would give them reading assignments that weren't work related, but they were inspirational. And again, they were not religious based, but they were inspirational. And he would have them read these things. And then in the quote unquote advance, they would talk about, in the things you've read or heard, how does that help us with where we're trying to go strategically? Or how does that help you in your own leadership? And so that was more of an educational approach. But again, it was not a proselytizing. There was like across different disciplines, these writings, and across different philosophical traditions. So that's one example. If you want to get more into real hands-on applied cultural change, there are some organizations that have done an assessment that they normally look at it as a values assessment. Richard Barrett's work on corporate values is a real good example of that. And
I believe that's just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's Barrett Values Center for people who might be looking for that online.
Yes, exactly. And Richard Barrett's work came out of his own study of more of the Hindu tradition and levels of consciousness. And so he has put this hierarchy of values aligned with levels of consciousness. And so he talks about helping to create conscious organizations. So that's a little more esoteric than, say, a moment of silence beforehand. Now, one of my favorite examples is Eileen Fisher. And Eileen Fisher puts her money where her mouth is in terms of valuing, and she's very open about valuing spirituality in the workplace. And so for every employee, I don't know if they still do this, but the last time I talked with them about 5 years ago, they were still doing this. Every employee would get $1,000 a year for professional development, And in their professional development plan, they would have to document how they spent the money and what the results were on their professional growth. And then they were also given $1,000 a year for personal growth. And they had to document what they spent the money on that was not work related.
Hmm.
They put it in their personal professional development plan. And there was examples ranging from going on a yoga retreat in Mexico to tuba lessons.
Tuba lessons. Mm-hmm.
Somebody took tuba lessons. That's what they used their $1,000 for. Somebody else would get massages. Someone else might go on a retreat with a guru, or go on a Catholic retreat or something that was more faith-based. But they could do whatever they wanted, but they had to report in that they did something to nurture their soul.
Yeah, beautiful. And in a very practical way, how does this help?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Yeah.
that the benefits and the value and the reward is here now in this business, not in some afterlife or whatever sort of, things that some people may not agree with philosophically, but they're very practical reasons.
Yes.
And I appreciate the way you're describing some of these practices. One of the things, I think I mentioned this to you in our previous conversation, is that one of my goals is to de-dogmatize this conversation of spirituality that doesn't need to be filled with dogma and rules and certainly proselytizing or anything close to that, but it can be inviting. It can be, I mean, I love the fact that these conversations that we have in this podcast, they dovetail so beautifully with the diversity and inclusion theme, because, well, this is another dimension of diversity. It's another way that we're different. It's another way that we can, certainly either learn from each other. Hopefully that happens, or at least respect the difference and recognize that, okay, we're each bringing something a little different. And that's sort of interesting. That's curious. How could we, if we're not learning from it, we can at least accept it, and we can at least cast a wider net for more broader minded, smart people from different parts of the world who don't look like me or sound like me or look like me, or physically operate like me, but it's another dimension. I appreciate that. It's a bit, when I spoke with Martin Root, who sends his regards to you, a few months ago, Martin said, spirituality is just the latest thing that we can talk about now at work. Whereas in the past, maybe it wasn't okay. In the past, we couldn't talk about race, or we couldn't talk about gender, or we couldn't talk about certain things. Politics is still a no-go, largely.
That'll get better too.
I certainly hope so. But I recognize and appreciate that, look, there are maybe some things that we don't bring up because they just are so touchy. And yes, I'd want that to be different, but I need to respect the reality and acceptance, first love, spirit. I need to accept that that's the way it is, and honor that. But I appreciate the practices you're talking about are very practical. They're very inviting. I don't experience them as proselytizing. I'm curious to know if other people do. I've had clients who have said, we need you to come back and facilitate another one of our meetings. Bring that bowl with you. And they're talking about the 7-metal Tibetan bowl that I would start the meetings. And for them, it was super practical. And I'd say you could meditate. You could think about your child. You could imagine yourself in a beautiful place, where you could just take 5 deep breaths, because we know from research that calms down our nervous systems. And we all know that you're just coming from the last meeting and running in with your 7th refill of coffee. And to be able to take even 60 seconds, and I would usually take no more than 60 seconds, can just get me present. And it's something that I did before, letting you into this Zoom room here, was to take 60 seconds to clear my head, to say, okay, just to be ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a basic and useful practice. And it's simple. There's no, well, one of the things, the way you describe what you do, I would call like offering a buffet. So you said when you could meditate, or you could think about your child, or you can just take a few breaths, that you're giving people options and they get to choose. So there's a sense of freedom, and that feels right. And what feels wrong and why people resist any of this kind of work is, again, they don't want anything shoved down their throats. They want the freedom to make their choices, or to be left alone. not have this be a part of the way they integrate the work. That could be just, my spirituality or my faith is private. I'll leave it between me and my mosque, me and my temple, me and my church. And, some people want their separation, but to give them the options, and always the option to not be involved. Everything should be voluntary. And so somebody might not even want to do a moment of silence. And you could say, well, we're going to spend the first minute in silence, so you can come in during minute 2. It's just always giving that option. And one of my books that I wrote, in fact, the second book I wrote, the second book I published, it was actually the first book I wrote, and it didn't get published for a long time. But it was called Creating Enlightened Organizations. And it's all about practices. So, and all these people that I interviewed and the companies I visited, I looked for best practices in workplace spirituality. I call them the 4 gateways to workplace spirituality. So there's the individual personal growth gateway. That's number 1. Number 2 is the leadership gateway, so that you create leadership development programs that help bring out the highest integration of body, mind, spirit in your leaders, in however that works for them. The third is team. You can do team spirit, team development. And I give just all practical examples throughout the book. These are all things organizations have done. And then the fourth is the systemic level of creating an entire organization that values workplace spirituality. There's not that many examples of that, but there were a few. And I do include Richard Barrett's work in there, because there's assessments can be a piece of this if you're intentionally wanting to create a culture that nourishes the human spirit. So that book is full of examples. I also did research recently for Fetzer Institute. They asked me to document what was going on in organizations with practices. And so I created a list of workplace spirituality organizations that include nonprofit, for-profit, academic. I didn't do consulting because that would have taken me the rest of my life. There's so many consultants doing this work that if I tried to document all the individual ones, I'd still be doing it. But that's available for free, and I could send that to you and put it on your website to share with people if you want.
We could actually put that up when we post this website. It could be something that's posted with it, that there's a link to that. Is that okay? Would it be linked somewhere or PDF? We'll figure it out. We'll make it happen.
Whatever you want. I could put it on my website and you link, or we just have it on your website.
No, that'd be great. No, we have people who know more about this, how to get this done. We'll make it happen. No, that'd be great. And I feel like I want to start to focus us down here, because I try to keep these conversations to less than an hour. But first of all, would you be open? I hope you'd be open to continuing this conversation, because there's just so much to talk about. No, thank you so much. And let's only plan on a part 2. But for people who are listening, those people who are still driving, they were driving at the beginning when we asked them to be very careful and not close their eyes. But if they wanted to learn more about where to learn about your research, where to see what your books are, just where would we steer them? Are there URLs or firms or centers, or where do people go?
Okay, well, my primary organization is the Edgewalkers International, and the website is www.edgewalkers, that's plural, edgewalkers with an S.org. And most of my books are still in print, and so they're available there, or you can order them from Amazon or any bookseller. And I have some research articles that I've posted there that are free to download. And for somebody who's more research oriented, one of the things they can do is go to Google Scholar and just Google Judi Neal, and you would find my publications. And if there's something that you find but you can't get access to because you don't have a university library or whatever, just email me at Judi, Judi, at edgewalkers.org, and I'm happy to send my publications out to you. 'cause I love sharing this work and hope people will build on it. More than anything else, I want to give them the courage, if they feel a calling to integrate spirituality and work. I want to give them the courage that they're not crazy, that lots of other people are doing this, that it's an emerging field, and that it's really the right time. The world needs this right now. So I want to help in any way I can.
Thank you so much. And I think you are, and through your research and your stories and your invitation. So I do look forward to continuing this conversation. Super grateful that we finally made this happen. And and thank you for that. And just thank you for your willingness to teach from the first step, because you've been at this a while. And again, I've spoken 3 or 4 guests on the show have said, have you spoken to Judi Neal? You need to talk to Judi Neal. You've been at this a while, but the way you talk about this is inviting. It's not overly academic. It's not something that I don't feel prepared to have this conversation. And I'm super, super grateful for that, because it makes the invitation so much more welcoming. It's not an invitation with conditions or expectations that way. So I appreciate just how you offer and extend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This has just been a joy being with you. Thank you.
Lovely. We'll talk again.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Spirituality and Leadership. If you want to access this wealth of knowledge and insight on a regular basis, subscribe to the show. Join the network of leaders who want to do and be better. Visit the site at spiritualityandleadership.com to catch all the episodes and learn more. Until next time, take good care of yourself.